Steven Crowder is an interesting case study for what amounts to a much bigger problem on YouTube and many other parts of the internet. The massive conservative media machine that positions itself as an alternative to the supposedly far-left mainstream media. In Crowder's case, he positions himself as a comedian with a political agenda, riffing on the news of the day, similar to something you'd see on The Daily Show. Here on YouTube, there are plenty of videos pushing back against individuals such as Crowder, and I've made a few of those myself, and I'm sure those will keep getting made. But these should be starting points for a more sophisticated understanding of how propaganda is made. Crowder is a performer who is less concerned with accurately presenting information than he is with entertaining his audience and spreading a conservative message. To explain his role in this propaganda system, we need to address some of what he does head on. But even if I or someone else could fashion the perfect takedown video, leaving Steven Crowder so thoroughly debunked that he quits his show and runs off to live in the mountains, another guy like him will rise up to take his place. So I think it's important we understand his role, how it works in the broader system, so we're prepared for this in the future and can more effectively undermine it. And on the off chance that a Steven Crowder fan is watching this, I'd genuinely love to read comments from anyone who can explain some of Crowder's obvious distortions and what they think about his position in the broader media landscape. I know he's got this defense of being a comedian, but that doesn't excuse how he spreads things that are plainly not true. And even if he does consider himself a comedian, he also presents himself as someone who's disseminating the news. I'd hold The Daily Show to the same standards. And speaking of that, I've always thought it was a bit weak when Jon Stewart in the past tried to deflect from the fact that people used his show as a source of news. I'm sure many people remember that classic TV moment where Jon Stewart embarrassed Tucker Carlson so badly that his CNN show got cancelled.
Here's just what I wanted to tell you guys.
Yeah.
Stop. Stop hurting America.
Okay, now...
There was a moment in there that was a bit of a dodge from Stewart, though.
You have John Kerry on your show, and you sniff his throne, and you're accusing us of partisan hackery?
Absolutely.
You've got to be kidding, man.
You're on CNN.
Say,
the show that leads into me is puppets making crank phone calls.
At the time, Jon Stewart was one of the most trusted voices on politics in America. According to a 2007 Pew poll, he was the fourth most admired journalist, tied with Brian Williams, Tom Brokaw, Tan Rather, and Anderson Cooper. He was seen as a brave truth-teller. And to be completely fair to his interview skills, he did sometimes ask tough questions of politicians that he was speaking to. And his overall critique in this segment is absolutely accurate, that CNN should be doing real news instead of bogus shows like Crossfire, which was just partisan hackery and theater dressed up as debate. But to fall back on this defense of he's just a comedian when his audience saw him as more than that rings a bit hollow to me. Steven Crowder will probably never rank high on the American trust scale, but much like Jon Stewart, he's not just a comedian telling jokes. He's delivering news and ideology using comedy. I'm going to do my best to ensure that I'm not presenting random jokes that Crowders make as some sort of serious point, and I hope people don't act as though him making serious points should instead be considered jokes just because it happens to be based on complete crap. So with that out of the way, let's start laying the foundation for this video by asking the simple question, what is Steven Crowder's show like? And to do that, we need to look at a few quick examples. Crowder likes to open his show talking about how he covers the stories mainstream media either ignores or doesn't provide proper context for.
It's weird because it's kind of, you would assume a slow news day, but it's a slow news day because the media really doesn't want to cover what has taken place really from Friday to now.
These examples, by the way, are all from recent videos that Crowder has done just because I wanted to choose some of the freshest examples of his program. Here's one story that he presented that genuinely caught me off guard as it does deal in real government policy, this time coming out of the UK. This is from a video titled 2SLGBT? The left can't get their own queer acronym straight.
The UK Health Department just quietly, again, in night published that the Pfizer vaccine, the biotech, whichever one, I can't remember, shouldn't be taken by breastfeeding mothers. Right. They said that also in 2020, I believe, with that one specifically. But other ones you could choose.
This sounds like a big deal. That the UK has just stated, supported by a document from 2020, that breastfeeding mothers shouldn't be getting the BioNTech Pfizer COVID vaccine because it hasn't been thoroughly tested enough. Crowder goes on to say that thanks to a recent update in YouTube's policy, they can now talk about this without fear of censorship.
How about if it saves one life? The guidance said, and the gold standard was, hey, if you're breastfeeding and we don't know, don't put it in your body. Yeah. Now that information isn't a bannable offense.
That's a pretty bold claim, that by YouTube and other social media platforms not allowing this information to be discussed, They are withholding information that could be saving someone's life. And even more vexing, the CDC apparently has conflicting medical information.
CDC strongly endorses it's safe for breastfeeding moms and for pregnant women. CDC still has that on their website.
Now I don't know which science to trust.
Today they have it on their website.
Maybe
it conflicts with the UK.
So which science can be trusted? Is the Pfizer vaccine safe for breastfeeding mothers or not? How can anyone be expected to trust science when we have conflicted information? Unlike Crowder's team, I took the step to actually attempt to answer these questions. If you look at the source given on Crowder's website, all the info certainly matches what he presented. And I can confirm that at the time this video came out, that little blurb in the top left corner certainly said this page was updated on August 16th, 2022. Only this isn't the only web page that was updated on that day. Looking at every single recent regulatory approval reveals that they were all updated on August 16th, 2022. This is the first major hint that something is a bit amiss here. If we look at the website more carefully, we can see that this August 16th update doesn't specifically refer to this document, but rather includes all the web pages in the section of the website. And if we go through the added step of reading this document, not simply the relevant excerpt, we find out that it was originally published in December of 2020 and last received an update in June of 2021, when part of this authorization was extended. What Crowder and his team get disastrously wrong with this is that this page isn't the UK's current guidance on COVID vaccination. This is a record of the vaccine's assessment in December of 2020. Since then, much more research has been done and the UK's recommendation has been updated. In fact, since the airing of Crowder's video, this page has been updated to clarify the situation. It now includes a blurb and redirects people to a more recent page for information on how these vaccines might affect breastfeeding mothers. In addition to discussing research that's been done in the last year and a half, a key section reads, "There is no evidence that COVID-19 vaccination while breastfeeding causes any harm to breastfed children or affects the ability to breastfeed." This false alarm over breastfeeding women being vaccinated isn't new either. In May of 2022, the same claim was being pushed on social media, including Facebook and Twitter. Crowder is taking this chance to spread this recycled bit of misinformation, presenting old vaccine regulatory approvals as current vaccine guidance. Medical and regulatory jargon can be difficult to parse, so this mistake is almost understandable. But the fact that there are responses to this specific claim a Google search away makes me think Crowder and his team didn't do more than a bare minimum of research, or are deliberately spreading misinformation. And if you think that maybe this is holding Steven Crowder and his team to a standard when they're a comedy show, here's a clip of what Steven Crowder says his show is trying to do.
There's nothing else that you glean from the show aside from entertainment. I hope that it's how to think, how to question, how to reason. Don't just take these opinions. Don't take it as carte blanche. Just go off and say, well, this is what they said. Check the references.
Steven Crowder loves to talk about how he includes the sources under his videos, typically found on his website. And the endnotes are a bit strange to read. Usually links get repeated several times, creating this illusion of research when they're really just reacting to a single article. And sometimes the notes just repeat what was said in the video with no additional context. Again, creating the impression that a lot of thought is being put into this program when clearly they're only looking at a few random stories, maybe reading a single supporting news article, or researching a cherry-picked stat and moving on. When data starts getting cited specifically, things start getting really wild. Here's one example I particularly enjoyed. On September 6, 2022, in a video titled, "Who are the MAGA Republicans Biden is targeting?" Crowder discussed a recent mass stabbing in Canada where 11 people were killed and 19 were injured. Crowder's angle in the story is that these murders could have been prevented had people been armed.
It's an unwritten agreement if you're in a room with people that you don't stab me, right? I'm sort of banking on you not stabbing me. The United States, the unwritten agreement we also have is, I'm hoping you don't stab me and you don't know what I have on my belt.
This muddy discussion of philosophy eventually gets somewhere interesting when he tries to use statistics to prove that all this talk about gun violence in the United States is overblown.
If you look at the murder rates per 100,000, you have El Salvador, you have Jamaica, you have Honduras. We have less than 5 homicides per 100,000. Jamaica, for example, has 43. El Salvador has 52.
Note that we're only seeing the top 6 here. It almost makes one wonder where exactly the United States ranks globally. It's a bit difficult to find up-to-date numbers for every country, and Crowder cites numbers from Statista that are hidden behind a paywall. It's also strange to cite the homicide rate for 2022 when there are still 4 months left in the year, and then compare it to a full year's data for the United States. I decided to look at numbers from the United Nations. Looking at that data, the US is ranked 59th between Tanzania and Bolivia. Of course, the numbers for both of these countries are a bit old, so there might be some wiggle room here. And really, 59th isn't the worst number in the world. It's certainly not top 10 material. But remember, the point of comparison here is Canada. You know, the country that had a recent mass stabbing, which Crowder said never would have happened in the United States, under the presumption that a heavily armed population would be safer. If we look at the comparative homicide rankings of these two countries, though, the US is in 59th and Canada ranks at 117th. So if we're arguing which country has a bigger problem with homicide, I think it's pretty clear that the United States is significantly more dangerous than Canada in this respect. But there are more egregious abuses of stats coming up.
And we're not even in the top 10 for mass shootings in the Western world. Just to be clear, we're ranked 11th.
Crowder was nice enough to include a link to where he got this table, and I have to say it made my job a lot easier. The show note for this table reads, "In the Western world, US isn't even in top 10 for mass shooting deaths. Source, World Population Review." If you actually read the article link, though, you'll find that this list doesn't come from them, but instead they're citing the pro-gun nonprofit Crime Prevention Research Center as the source for this table. And the rest of the article from World Population Review then goes on to point out a number of methodological flaws with this dataset. I'll read a relevant excerpt. Because of the smaller populations of most European countries, individual events in those countries had statistically oversized influence and warped the results. For example, Norway's world-leading annual rate was due to a single devastating 2011 event in which far-right extremists Anders Behring Breivik gunned down 69 people at a summer camp on the island of Utøya. Norway had 0 mass shootings in 2009, 2010, 2012, 2013, 2014, and 2015. An easy, though arguably insensitive way to illustrate the shortcomings of this approach is to apply it to the 9/11 attacks, which killed 2,977 people in the United States on a single day in 2001. Running that data through the CRPC formula yields the following statistics. Plane hijackings by terrorists caused an average of 297.7 deaths per year in the US from 2001 to 2010. This is mathematically accurate, but it gives a badly distorted impression of what actually happened during those 10 years. In addition, the CRPC study went a step further and computed average annual deaths per capita. Critics argue this further warps the data because Norway's population is a fraction of the US population. As a result, Norway's death rate came out more than 20 times higher than that of the US, which tallied 66 deaths in 2012 alone, nearly matching Norway's total for the full study, and averaged at least 1 mass shooting death per month for the entire 7-year data set. World Population Review does go on to provide a list of its own, though, this one that looks at the median death rate rather than the mean. This prevents outliers from throwing off the dataset. Their list looks like this. The United States is number 1 with a death rate of 0.058 per million people from mass public shootings. Every other country scored 0. The article also highlights some other research that contradicts the data Crowder shared with his audience. All of this comes from the source Crowder gives us. It argues the exact opposite of what he says it does. But I do wonder how many people in his audience are reading these sources at all. Or at least reading them all the way through. And let's be very clear here, this isn't one source pretending 2 sets of numbers neutrally, and I chose the one I like and Crowder chose the one he likes. This source is presenting the numbers I'm using as better than the ones Crowder and his team chose. But the part of this segment that was a bit more disturbing, to me personally at least, was when Crowder started describing a recent mass shooter in Nova Scotia. The final victim was someone the shooter knew personally. Here's how Crowder describes it.
That was the last victim. Where he said, "Remember me?" She was like, "Shit." All right.
Gabe.
I guess that's one for you, Gabe.
Well, a dozen.
Yeah.
Jeez. Fool me once.
Fool me once. Fool me 22 times.
While I generally ignore the jokes Crowder makes, this one seemed particularly disgusting, as if a woman's flippant dismissal of this guy is to blame here. Or perhaps he just finds the irony funny. Whatever it is, it seemed especially heartless. Also, as a small note regarding the shooter in Nova Scotia, of the 5 guns he was armed with, 4 of them were obtained in the United States. And is probably not a reflection of a gun problem in Canada, but rather the proliferation of guns south of the border. Many people, myself included, have made this point before, but it's worth repeating. Steven Crowder is a performer. He doesn't go to his show ready to talk about the news stories he has voraciously been consuming and researching, working hard to formulate educated opinions on. He reacts to random stories of the day with talking points he has been trained to deliver. He may source a few of these stories himself, he may even believe some of these talking points, but more often than not, his commentary is incoherent and doesn't really reach any meaningful conclusion, outside of saying the left is bad and the right is good. He doesn't honestly respond to the news, he shapes it to fit an agenda. After watching his show for 2 weeks, I have dozens of pages of notes on his manipulations and outright lies, some of which are even more egregious than the ones I highlighted. But I think it's important to go further than restating what many people already know, because like I said at the top of this video, if Steven Crowder left the internet to perform bad comedy on cruise ships, another alleged community would take place and we'd be doing the same dance all over again. Instead, let's understand how Steven Crowder operates in the larger system of advancing right-wing ideologies. One interesting model was proposed in the book That's Not Funny, How the Right Makes Comedy Work for Them by Matt Sinkowicz and Nick Marks. In it, they propose the idea of an industrial complex of conservative comedy that advances concepts, news stories, and other ideological talking points under the guise of comedy, and that by dismissing this comedy as simply not funny, we are missing how conservative comedy is becoming increasingly successful and shaping politics. This complex is made up of several different components, ranging from the big mainstream successes, such as Greg Gutfeld and his Gutfeld late-night comedy show, all the way down to niche far-right trolls who spread the most disturbing narratives. Crowder's place is roughly in the middle, and is identified as being a part of the Christian conservative comedy section of the complex. The book sums him up nicely like this. Upon anything more than an initial consideration, his argumentative acrobatics fall flat and retreat into sophistic, contextless data. For liberal comedy fans, he's anathema from the start. For many conservatives just looking for a quick diversion, however, Crowder's rough approximation of youth and intelligence somehow succeeds. The book identifies Crowder and people who operate in similar spaces, such as Ben Shapiro, as effectively laundering far-right talking points and bringing them into the mainstream. While watching Steven Crowder, I noticed several examples of this myself. Some of them are probably familiar to wider audiences, such as conspiracy theories about the federal government being behind January 6th, and some are lesser known, such as stories of President Biden having secretly abused his daughter. I chronicled one of these myself in 2020 when I made a video about Steven Crowder spreading election fraud stories the day after the federal election took place. Most of the stories he brings up in this video, such as the nefarious red wagon in Michigan or the Sharpies in Arizona, mostly went away, because much like the other stories being pushed, there isn't much evidence to support them. But the overall narrative of the election not being legitimate continues to persist throughout right-wing media. None of these stories have much merit and are typically formed from partial or sometimes completely fabricated evidence, but that was never important. What really matters here is how these narratives are shaped by actors such as Steven Crowder. It should be clarified, though, that neither the book nor I am proposing some grand conspiracy theory. Rather, many of the actors in this space are shaped by a variety of different motivations, whether it's chasing after the attention of an increasingly polarized conservative base or appealing to the needs of conservative politicians. The point is that these comedians are effectively moving talking points in the same direction, entertaining narratives and advancing right-wing agendas, regardless of the quality of evidence. That's Not Funny uses one particularly striking example of how narratives are cycled up through conservative media. This is at the close of the chapter that looked at Steven Crowder. As quick background though, there's a commonly held conspiracy theory that the Clintons are systematically murdering their opposition to accrue power, often shorted to the phrase, the Clinton body count. It's the sort of theory that was popularized on fringe outlets such as InfoWars, but the narrative has slowly been moving up the chain. The book traces how this conspiracy theory has moved from Alex Jones to the Babylon Bee and Steven Crowder, who use humor as a cover to advance this story. That's Not Funny describes an exchange in a now-deleted tweet where Steven Crowder suggests the theory to Ben Shapiro, who is slightly higher up in the respectability chain than Steven is. Here's the relevant excerpt from the book. Shapiro himself panders to the right wing only slightly less pathetically than Crowder, saying that he is not a big buyer of the grand Clinton body count conspiracy. He does, however, go on to say that it's reasonable to believe that longtime Clinton associate Sidney Blumenthal may have killed a number of people in Libya on behalf of the Clintons. In the course of a single minute, Steven Crowder and Ben Shapiro moved the Babylon Bee's Clinton joke up the argumentative and economic chain, making it seriously, if still ridiculously, reasoned argument while expanding its appeal throughout and beyond the right-wing comedy complex. By the time Crowder and Shapiro are done talking, they've given viewers 2 iterations of the Clinton conspiracy argument, both the garden variety Alex Jones version, as well as a more sophisticated sounding one that relies on Shapiro's knowledge of Hillary Clinton's involvement in Libya. Crowder and Shapiro then return viewers to the comfortable realm of sophomore humor, having been both entertained and misinformed. Conspiracy theories and other narratives move up the chain over time, often being modified and adjusted to be palatable to each figure's audience. But the stories aren't the only things changing, as audiences become increasingly radicalized after being bombarded with this propaganda daily, as seen in Crowder's show. While watching Crowder's show for a week, there was another example of a far-right narrative that was being manufactured in real time and served as a microcosm of how all these pieces fit together. I'm going to dive a little deeper into this one so people can see what this all looks like in action, not just Crowder's role in it, but how it fits into a larger landscape of misinformation, propaganda, and advancing a far-right agenda. On September 1st, 2022, a video was released on Crowder's YouTube channel with the title, "We Took on Armed Antifa at a Kid-Friendly Drag Show, Crowder Undercover." At the time of writing, it has been viewed over 1,350,000 times. This video shows Steven Crowder's crew, without Crowder himself, allegedly conducting an investigation of a supposedly kid-friendly drag show that took place in Roanoke, Texas. First, let's sum up the facts of this event before looking at Crowder's story. It's important to have a historical basis to understand how all of this started to begin with. There has been a growing backlash against the LGBT+ community in the last few years, and in recent months there have been a number of right-wing protests for drag-themed events, including all ages and 19+ events. There have been several high-profile incidents in Texas throughout the summer, with 2 notable ones being a show in Dallas on June 4th and another one in Houston on July 10th. None of this is exclusive to the summer of 2022, and certainly not exclusive to Texas, but for this story we're primarily looking at what's been happening in Texas throughout the summer. These protests have included members of the Proud Boys militia and fascist provocateurs like John Doyle. They're also part of a right-wing media feeding frenzy that framed them as stands against supposed degeneracy, while in reality serving as a platform to attack people in the LGBT+ community.
Better remember that Alamo, mother. Better remember Goliad, mother. Because we will run your sorry ass over again. Bet on that.
You should go. You know we lost at the Alamo, right?
I'm well aware of history, you mother.
But why are you bringing it up? Because you don't know your history then.
You stupid.
You lost.
Yeah, we beat their mother ass in San Jacinto afterwards. It's what kicked the mother shit off to beat your sorry mother ass. Get the out of here.
Thanks for a history lesson.
In addition to these demonstrations increasing, it's important to acknowledge there has also been an upswing in violence against the LGBT+ community. According to the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, anti-LGBT+ mobilization increased by over 4 times from 2020 to 2021, and 2022 is on track to be even worse. In Texas, the protests against drag shows have largely been organized by Kelly Neidert, head of the organization Protect Texas Kids. As a quick bit of background for Protect Texas Kids, it's a nonprofit and, according to its own website, is fighting back against leftist curricula and personal agendas of aligned teachers, indoctrinating kids with critical race theory, anti-American sentiments, and much more. Kelly Neidert has described herself as a Christian fascist before she was banned on Twitter for suggesting people who participate in pride events should be rounded up. Her protests have been amplified by right-wing media outlets, most frequently on the Blaze Network, which Steven Crowder's show is a part of. Here are the facts for the event in question. The event Crowder was covering in his video was called Barrel Babes Brunch, taking place at Anderson Distillery and Grill on August 28, 2022 in Roanoke, Texas. The venue's owner is Jay Anderson, and the host for the event is his son, Bailey, who performs as a drag queen under the name Trisha Delish. The Facebook event has 160 people saying they would attend and 423 expressing interest. On August 17th, a group called Protect Texas Kids created an event in response to this called Protest All Ages Drag Show, a name that was eventually changed to Pop-Up Protest Against Kid-Friendly Drag Show. 33 people claimed they would attend. On August 23rd, in a Facebook post, Jay Anderson issued a statement that his son would ensure that the show would remain clean. That is, and this is quoted directly from their Facebook post, no foul language, no sexual content, no erotic behavior, performers will be fully clothed, music will not contain explicit lyrics. On their Facebook page, the venue has also confirmed that they had passed the Texas Comptroller's inspection for not including any sexual content as part of the show. The event took place on the 28th, and based on all available video and photographs, the Barrel Babes brunch event was very well attended. The indoor section was completely full, with many patrons also outside sitting on the patio and in an overflow area, and the venue reports having completely sold out of food. Performers for that afternoon included Trisha Delish, Blue Valentine, Ariel Diamond Doll, and Navda Montana. Visible in photo and videos is the presence of protesters holding signs that claim the venue was sexualizing children, that drag shows are not for kids, and one that read, "Drag the Queens out of town." Also present there was independent journalist Stephen Bonicelli. He was gracious enough to speak to me, and this is how he described the makeup of the group of protesters.
So I would say anywhere between 1/3 and half of the people on the opposing side were people I had seen before. So they were either very activist types, they were people who had organizations that they ran, nonprofit organizations that focused on these sorts of issues. People I had seen in Proud Boy uniforms. There's a number of familiar faces that have affiliations that are pretty explicitly far-right, including the media people.
The third visible group who were present that day are members of the Elm Fork John Brown Gun Club. Dressed in black and carrying rifles, they were providing security for the event, keeping protesters at a distance and escorting families back to their cars. The club refers to themselves as a non-political mutual aid collective. I should note that, to a non-American, this group does look a little scary, but in the context of the people who attended the brunch, no one seemed particularly bothered by it. Though it is a sad commentary on the state of affairs that anyone might feel the need for armed security at a drag brunch. In a Facebook comment on August 30th, venue owner Jay Anderson clarified the club involvement, writing, "We did not hire or pay for security services from Elm Fork John Brown Gun Club for this event. They were present of their own volition and cooperated with us to peacefully make sure our patrons and performers remain safe from protesters who attempted to destroy property and threaten violence. We made every effort to hire an off-duty law enforcement officer for the event, but due to staff shortages, none were available. We are grateful to the City of Roanoke Police Department for responding quickly when protesters became aggressive towards our patrons." The police were made aware of both the event and the protest ahead of time and were also present throughout the day. Crowder's video omits a lot of these details, each one being publicly available several days before his own video went up, and in some cases weeks before it went up. His video includes a few deliberate distortions from the very beginning.
Newly opened Anderson Distillery and Grill decided to get in on this underage action and host their own child-friendly, that's the key word here, child-friendly drag show.
Although Crowder calls it a key word, I couldn't find the phrase child-friendly in any of the promotional materials for the events. The closest I could find is a clarification Facebook post that says it will be a PG version of a drag show. When it comes to marketing towards children, the difference here would be between a G-rated movie and a PG-rated movie. In other words, in one, it's generally understood that kids are encouraged to watch G-rated movies, whereas in the case of PG ones, it is up to the discretion of the parents as to whether or not their particular child should be viewing this entertainment. By phrasing it the other way, though, as if this event were advertised as child-friendly, Crowder is shaping a narrative that this event was designed to target children specifically. The only place I could find where this event was described as child-friendly was the Protect Texas Kids Facebook post, so we can clearly see where Crowder is getting his framing for this event. Crowder's team spoke directly to participants with a camera outside the venue, and several were sent in with hidden cameras to film the show from the inside. The results are not as explosive as the title suggests.
Surprisingly, the first thing that greeted my team outside of the child-friendly distillery that was hosting the drag show was the overabundance of strapped to the gills Black Bloc and Antifa members surrounding said establishment.
Another easy mistake made is identifying the group outside as Black Bloc Antifa. As I said earlier, these people are from the Elm Fork John Brown Gun Club, but the use of Black Bloc Antifa is to support the idea that Antifa is some kind of organized group operating as a network. While the club is explicitly anti-fascist, and there are several chapters across the United States, they are one of several different anti-fascist groups, each operating independently throughout the world. They don't operate as some singular network. To present the idea as if they are operating as a singular network is done to support the idea that there is some grand conspiracy or cabal that is controlling all of these individual actors. It's easier to understand when you look at how other groups are operated and labeled when they operate under different ideologies, such as fascism. For example, one fascist group are the Proud Boys. They also have many different chapters and on occasion may coordinate with one another. But they are one of many fascist groups, and no one refers to fascism as some sort of broad, overreaching organization. Rather, it's a principle that these groups organize around. The same is true for anti-fascism, or Antifa. Crowder's crew on the outside doesn't fare too well trying to talk to members of the club, who stand silent, not participating in any interviews. The interview also incorrectly identifies them as protesters, which is inaccurate as they weren't protesting anything. There were no signs or chanting or anything you might see in a counter-protest. This group was providing security. And for some strange reason, Crowder identifies the right-wing protesters as counter-protesters.
Now, in the spirit of balance, I would be remiss if I didn't point out the counter-protesters, who also looked extremely intimidating.
Another mistake. Even if the Glen Club were protesters as well, why would they protest the drag show they were supporting? Obviously, the right-wing protesters came first, but by calling them counter-protesters, it reframes who the aggressors are here. Crowder is setting up the right-wing protesters as a reaction to the drag show with armed security, rather than a drag show that had armed security in response to the Protect Texas Kids protest, many of which had in previous months had members of the Proud Boys and other fascist militias show up to threaten violence to people who were attending the brunch. Crowder's video also shows the protesters as harmless as possible, with an older lady in particular being highlighted. The police confirm with the woman that the protesters are meant to stay across the street from the venue.
Just everybody stay on their side, and so far it's been good. As long as they stay there, that's fine.
While interviewing one of the protesters, we find out that one of them crossed the street to approach the venue, supposedly to talk to someone he knew.
I went over there to talk to somebody I knew, right? You put your hands on me! And all of a sudden I get like 7 or 8 of them come up to me. 7 or 8 of them come up to me. Get off here! Get out! Get off this property!
We get the briefest of looks at the confrontation, and then his framing of what went down. It certainly makes it sound as though those unreasonable people attending the drag show were acting aggressively, but footage from sources that aren't Steven Crowder reveal more of what happened at this confrontation.
Go ahead, I dare you. Go ahead. Man, one time.
As this video from Twitter reveals, the man in red wearing sunglasses and his associate in the leather vest got into a shouting match with some of the people there. The gun club members repeatedly asked them to go back to the other side of the street while they continued to argue. In this particular case, the guy in red only seemed to leave after being supposedly spit upon, and then immediately trying to flag down a police officer so someone could be arrested for assault.
You all need to go to the other side of the street. You all need to go to the other side of the street.
Note how before running for the police, the man in red took off his sunglasses as if he were ready for a fight.
Oh, whoa! That's right there. I got it up here. Hey, Blue! Hey! Blue! She just spit on me!
This is a tactic seen at other protests, where right-wing protesters attempt to get a rise out of people so they can provoke a physical reaction. They then have the police arrest people or respond with violence of their own and claim self-defense. Stephen Monticelli was nearby when this all went down and provided some additional context on this confrontation, including the man in the red shirt's claim that he was there to talk to someone he knew.
He had come over to the security and basically antagonized them, calling them a bunch of pussies. When I saw this confrontation occurring, what I gathered is that another person who had been on the other side with him at some point, or perhaps not with him, but, was a fellow anti-drag protester, had come over to start talking to people. And that happened on a number of occasions. People would come over and try to get into some sort of verbal confrontation, and they'd be filming it or taking photos. And so it seems to me that he had followed one of his friends over there as they were having a conversation, and then it just kind of escalated from there. And if I hadn't seen him come up prior and, with a smile on his face, gleefully using, antagonistic slurs against people he doesn't know, I might not have understood what's going on.
The tactic being used by the protester was summed up at a similar event in Arlington in July.
They're looking for an excuse to start a fight. I mean, that's all it is. It's about intimidation. They just want to get somebody to do something so they can all roll in and have an excuse and try and blame it on Antifa starting something. When you saw that, I'm sure you get all these recordings of it. They're them getting in people's faces, trying to intimidate, threatening, trying to start fights. You hear right there. They're looking for combat. We're not.
There are numerous examples of protesters approaching the drag brunch in Roanoke and starting arguments. On the other side, I did find one video that showed an instance of a member of the gun club crossing the street, though this was to intervene on behalf of an older woman who was being confronted by anti-drag protesters. According to the gun club's Twitter, this happened a few times before the event started. I should also note that there was at least one incident of violence that was caught on camera where one of the protesters headbutted a woman.
No need for this. Go back to your side. Go back.
As best I could tell, this was the only instance of violence on that day. The footage used by Crowder always presents the protesters in the best possible light, while attendees of the drag show are shown screaming angrily. It's clear that footage was chosen to display a version of events that supports the narrative he's trying to push. Even with their best efforts, the protesters still come off as incoherent.
You want to be gay, you want to drag queen, go for it. You're not hurt. But adults, but don't involve a little 8-year-old girl. That you tell Susie, who's 11, Susie, you need a double mastectomy because you really want to be a boy. Susie doesn't know if she wants to be a boy or not yet. Puberty blockers.
Probably didn't know what you wanted to eat for breakfast.
Right.
A double mastectomy for an 8-year-old doesn't have anything to do with the drag show. That's not what happens there. What is being done here is a general anti-trans panic being paired with an event that plays with gender roles. It is a random assortment of things that can be placed under the LGBT+ banner that is being branded as suspect, regardless of what's actually going on. Throughout its 50-minute runtime, the Crowder video struggles to demonstrate that the event is sexualizing children or exposing them to sexually explicit material. The closest they get is this moment here. And that's it. A drag queen in a short skirt on a picnic table. The rest of the shots are of drag queens dressed as Power Rangers or in evening gowns, or distant shots from a crowd where you can't really see anything. None of it seems particularly sexual. All the shots of the show are completely benign. It'll take a moment, such as a parent saying no one is going to mind if her daughter moves up to get a better look at the show, and then uses quick cuts and dramatic music to create the illusion of a threat that isn't there. It really is the presence of drag queens. It has nothing to do with what they're doing. It's people flouting gender norms being presented as deviant. It really reflects someone who has never really attended or tried to understand what a drag show even is. The video stretches so hard that it actually brings up a tweet that happened 2 days after the event to suggest that these drag queens are up to no good. If they had an example of a drag queen saying stuff like this at the event, they wouldn't need to dredge up a tweet that happened after the event took place. They would have just shown it on camera. Considering they had hidden cameras on the inside and this is the best they can do, it really presents a tame drag show, and certainly not one that was sexualizing children. The Crowder video also includes some crucial political connections.
Texas, I'm from Minnesota, so
okay, yeah.
I'm like, anything that's different, I'm like, we can make Texas blue.
Oh, so that's what this is all about. Hi, Robert Francis.
Since a random person at the brunch from Minnesota was at the event, and someone was supposedly handing out pamphlets to support Beto O'Rourke, this reveals it is some kind of plot by the Democratic Party. According to Stephen Monticelli, he didn't see anyone actually handing out pamphlets for the Democratic Party while he was there. While it's possible he may have just missed a person who was there, I think it's worth noting that the pamphlets pictured are door knockers, so it's also possible that the area had been canvassed in the past by O'Rourke's campaign, as there is an election coming up in November. Monticelli did describe some other flyers he saw being handed out at the event, though. These were spreading awareness about the Steadfast Baptist Church, which has been labeled as a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center and the Anti-Defamation League.
This is a quote: certain people should get a bullet in their head to get get AIDS and die.
The video also makes the claim that the people there weren't from the area.
Most of the people with whom we spoke were not even from the area. They just came in for the event. They were imported.
This completely ignores that the protest's organizer, Kelly Neidert, isn't from Roanoke either, and as heard earlier from Monticelli's account, somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of the anti-drag protesters were from out of town. While certainly some percentage of the protesters were Roanoke natives, they weren't the overwhelming majority of people who showed up that day. And comparing the two crowds who showed up, the protesters were easily dwarfed by all the people who attended the drag brunch. And looking at the attendees of the drag brunch, it should be noted that the organizers for the event are Roanoke natives. The overwhelming success of the event, including selling out of all the food, and support from the community suggests that this was a huge hit, and not some kind of AstroTurf Democratic Party pop-up invading the community. The video closes with one last lie.
Nothing that took place in Roanoke was family friendly, and at its core, this entire charade is nothing more than a method to indoctrinate children into a perverse ideology. At its worst, at best, show them hypersexualized content that would never be allowed with underage children in a heterosexual strip club.
I'm not sure what Crowder is talking about because none of that can be seen in this footage shown. The montage at the end of drag queens collecting tips is, I suspect, meant to evoke the ideas of tipping a stripper, something, by the way, that happens pretty regularly at a strip club. The truth is, though, you can see images like this at any public performance, whether it's a musician with an open instrument case in front of them or a busker passing around a hat after their performance. Performers get tipped. This isn't something people only do for strippers. It's almost as if this conclusion was written before the footage was even looked at, and it speaks to how these exposés are more like the performance of journalism rather than the actual practice. Hidden cameras and interviews are deployed, but viewers aren't really learning anything about the event. They're just seeing a group of people pretend to be journalists while presenting a piece of propaganda. Stepping away from this specific video, we can see that Crowder's team wasn't the only right-wing media outfit present that day. Taylor Hanson was there, filming and tweeting about it. He's appeared on programs on Blaze Media, InfoWars, and other right-wing outlets. Also present were Chris Cruz and Sarah Gonzalez from Blaze Media, and someone from the Texas Family Project. You probably haven't heard of most of these people, but they play a role in pushing this out to the wider media landscape. The operation works like this. A protest is staged by on-the-ground activists against a drag show. This is typically organized by a low-level provocateur such as Kelly Neidert. She operates in cooperation with other activists and former and current militia members to cause a stir, and ideally to provoke a violent reaction from the left. They claim to represent the communities they protest in, although they often are not a part of those communities. As they cause a commotion, smaller right-wing media personalities show up to create social media posts, articles, and videos to foster this narrative of children under threat from the left. They adopt the framing of activists and selectively present evidence to create the impression of a hostile left towards a calm and dignified right. This is typically at odds with the reality seen played out in independent media voices, and occasionally from local news and mainstream media. As one of the bigger voices in the right-wing media space, Steven Crowder plays a big role in this part of the system. This content spreads around, and some of it may die a death, never to be remembered or thought of again, but on occasion, one of these stories will break into the mainstream. This might lead to an appearance on Tucker Carlson or some other major network where the right-wing framing of this event, complete with distortion, goes into the broader public to reinforce narratives such as the LGBT+ community is a threat to children. In the case of this particular event, here's how it was covered on Fox News. The headline reads, "Masked Antifa protesters show up brandishing weapons at Texas drag brunch with kids." Quoted in a Salon article, Sarah Kate Ellis, president and CEO of the LGBTQ media organization GLAAD, said, "It's so important to see these not as isolated incidents, but as the inevitable result of bold lies and misinformation streaming constantly on networks like Fox News, alt-right news sites, and on unchecked social media accounts dedicated to harassing and targeting LGBTQ people. The anti-LGBTQ rhetoric we see during these incidents comes straight from lawmakers like DeSantis and Abbott and their co-conspirators on Fox News, who are leading the charge to misrepresent, demonize, and target our community. This propaganda machine is used in a number of different capacities, not just to attack the LGBTQ+ community, but we saw it being deployed to attack the Black Lives Matter demonstrations in 2020, and we can also see examples of it attacking women, such as the hate storm that was stirred up against Amber Heard. When looking at stories such as what happened in Roanoke, Crowder's video is one piece of a much larger operation, trying to reframe the event. This is not a story of a town standing up against a trans mob. Rather, it's a town celebrating inclusivity that was interrupted by a manufactured right-wing protest. Steven Crowder was part of a much larger system, one designed to threaten and marginalize LGBT+ people, while simultaneously advancing an anti-left-wing agenda. One thing the Crowder video hopefully shows is that it's not about attacking members of the LGBT+ community alone, but also tying these events to the broader political discourse. These stories represent a multi-pronged approach, whether it's through electoral politics or to galvanize people to run for local government. The purpose remains the same, to remove all traces of the left from positions of power and replace them with figures on the right. Content like this also further radicalizes any audiences who are seeing these narratives that warp reality and frame everything from a right-wing perspective. And depending on which audience they're in, these narratives are refined and made palatable for as many people as possible. And lost in all of this is the lasting impact on the communities that are used to perpetuate these narratives. While the Roanoke event was able to be held successfully, this doesn't always happen. Shortly after this event, a Disney-themed drag brunch was canceled in Denton after repeated threats to staff and owners of the venue. The rage against this event was similarly drummed up by right-wing media personalities, though when looking at the crowd at Roanoke, we can see much of this support is not popular so much as it is marshaled and manned by activists and media figures, creating the illusion of popular support. This small group of people also becomes animated enough that the credible threats of violence are issued, leading to events being shut down, something that is then celebrated in right-wing media spaces. Texas was not always so hostile to drag shows. Monticelli described a similar event that happened a few years ago.
City of Austin, there was a bar there that had a drag brunch that was Disney-themed. No one wrote an article about it. There was no uproar over it. It just happened. But now, over the past several months, it has become this new panic.
By starting off with Steven Crowder, I wanted to begin with a very visible piece of the puzzle. But here at the end, I hope what's most visible is how this piece fits into the larger picture. Crowder is awful, yes, but he isn't singularly responsible for how these things work. And when we push back against him, we should understand that there's a whole system we need to be resisting. It may not be enough to just point out how he's wrong, but also how his wrongness serves a broader purpose, in concert with a lot of other actors. While there are networks of activists, media companies, and political parties that coordinate activities within them, this is likely not the work of some shadowy cabal pulling the levers on some arcane machine. Instead, I would suggest that there are a myriad of groups that feed off one another. Whether it's for power, fame, or money, there is something to be gained in helping advance these narratives. Crowder is doing his little performance either unaware or indifferent to whatever harm it may cause. In the grand scheme of things, he's a bit of a stooge, one worth paying attention to, but not one that should distract us entirely. And we should always remember that real people are affected by this propaganda. While Crowder and figures like him couch their crusades with many grand claims, they're more often than not misrepresenting reality to advance a far-right agenda while stepping on the necks of society's most vulnerable to get there. Whenever I make one of these videos about a right-wing figure, their fans inevitably slide into the comments section to tell me I'm too afraid to debate these people, as if Steven Crowder has been pestering me to sit down for a debate. I'm not really a debate guy, but in this one case, I'm willing to make an exception for Steven Crowder. I will debate you. I'm sure it would be an experience. Speaking of experiences, if you'd like more experiences like the one you had while watching this video, consider becoming a patron or a member for the channel. You'll get your name in the credits, advance access to new videos, and some other fun extras I throw in along the way. If you would like to support me in a non-monetary fashion, you can like, comment, subscribe, and of course, hit the bell for notifications. Thank you all so much for watching.